Hello, everyone. Welcome to our very first event of the year from Hub AI. My name is Rafsan. I'm the co-head of liaison at Hub AI, along with Judith, who's also present here. And today we have a very special topic, which you might be familiar with, about thesis writing and digital topics. So you're all sure that, at one point during the semester, your supervisor comes to you and tells you, like, you got to start writing your thesis. But since we cannot even choose our morning cheese, so thesis writing is a completely different ballgame, right? But today we have two very special guests. They're very recent LU alumni. We have Philipp, who has done his master's in innovation and global sustainable development. Yes,
that's it. Yeah.
And we also have Tish, who has done her master's in Sociology of Law.
Yay.
And I will let both of you talk more about yourselves. And yeah, so shall we start with Philipp?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Philipp. I'm German. And yeah, as Rafsan said, I finished my master's at LUSEM last year. So at the School of Economics and Management, with a focus on innovation economics and global sustainable development. Yeah, and currently I live in Malmö, and now I work as a consultant for online platforms, which is linked to my thesis, but I'll tell you afterwards a bit more. So over to Tish.
Yeah, great. So hi, everyone. So I do Sociology of Law. I originally come from France and Wales. And yeah, I originally did law, but for my master's decided to go into Sociology of Law. And now I work with social robots. So apparently the next job title I'll have will have robot in it. But that's a bit about me.
Great. So shall we start our event?
Yes.
And Philipp, I'll invite you to talk about the topics.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what I want to do tonight is share a bit of my experience writing the thesis. Not so much about what I actually found, but how I got there. I must apologize in advance. You'll see my beautiful face because I didn't prepare any bullet points or slides because I was down with illness, unfortunately. But yeah, I hope you'll find this entertaining. And if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or interrupt me as well. I'm very happy to talk this, but I think there will be a Q&A afterwards as well. So as I said before, my program was innovation economics and global sustainable development. And for me, I was always most interested in the innovation side. But the program I was in is relatively past focused, and I'm a future oriented person. So I was a bit unhappy about that. And then I took a course outside of my department, actually at the School of Engineering. I believe, and actually no, it was cross-disciplinary actually, but the topic I chose was in School of Engineering, focusing on AI in society, and a topic that particularly interested me was transparency. So basically, what happens to our data that is collected online and how that is used afterwards. And I knew that was kind of the tingling subject for me in the fall before my thesis, and I was like, I want to do this long term because for your thesis, you need a topic that really interests you long term. And then I thought, okay, you got to combine this with my department. And there was definitely a big clash because, as I said, my department it's economic history. It has the word history in the name, but the topic very relevant, very contemporary. Plus, it was in the middle of the pandemic, so there would have been a problem with data collection as well, which was on top of my mind. So I thought, okay, how can I approach this? And well, the first thing I did is I brought up the LUSEM staff web pages and saw if there was anybody in not just my department, but in our faculty that was even working with topics similar. And the answer was no. And I knew if I was going to venture out into uncharted territory that I would need some sort of faculty support. So I went back to the person that actually sparked my interest, that lectured in the course in that, and had a talk with him, how he sees things and where he saw things will go, which was very helpful because it introduced me to the wider field of literature. Of course, I had a little bit of knowledge from the course that I did there before. And then made a game plan. And for me, it was very clear from point one is that I'm writing a thesis for my program and for my department. and not for the things that interest me. So what I tried from the outset is to keep the focus on the reader, which would be a person that has no clue about platforms or about data being collected because they are quite past focused, or anything else. So my initial search then began with a topic that was related in my field of study. And because I was writing about data, I found, I literally did a Google search, found the concept of data-driven innovation, which was relatively new, but peer-reviewed. So I used the month of December, and I really started working in January, but I used the month of December to just dig into that and write up a little literature review about that for myself so I would understand it. Because in your thesis, you'll have to explain it to somebody else. And then, January comes around and I got to sign my supervisor, and turns out it was an emeritus professor that is no longer researching or teaching. So yeah, if you write about online platforms such as Facebook or Google, it's a person that has never Googled in his life, actually. So I was like, okay, if I can explain it to him, my thesis will go through. So this was very hard, of course, but in a way, maybe even the best possible supervisor I could have, because he was the harshest critic out there. And he really reminded me as well that the person you're writing your thesis for, of course, you want to contribute to academia and you want to contribute to the discussion and maybe even pull this forward if you're interested in academic career afterwards. But that thesis is going to be graded by your department, and you are measured against what is expected of you in the program you're doing. So you really had to bring it home there. And then I kind of thought about, okay, how can I approach this to bring in the techie side that interested me and more the innovation side that I need to write about. And then I was like, I need to break things down. And well, in the words of my supervisor, serve an idiot breakfast. So that's what I did. My literature review. I had it really broken down into the various sub chapters. So I did one on transparency and one on online platforms to lay the groundwork, and one on transparency in online platforms, and one about the innovation concept and the literature that is nested in. So almost I had 3 independent pillars that my thesis was standing on. And then in the last subchapter of my literature review, I combined that. And that was really this last subchapter, traditional literature you would expect for a thesis. But I really needed the rest so the user could understand it. And something that I learned afterwards that really helped me or helped the user in that sense as well, and helped my grade in the end, was structure. So I used formatting, heading, bold, cursive, underlining, all of the charts you could imagine, just to really make it easily understandable, because I always expected that I have a reader that understands nothing or comes with 0 prior knowledge. So you got to keep it really concise and easy to understand for them. And that's something that really helped. Also keeping a red thread throughout the thesis, which is important, because you end up with a document that is 60 pages or longer. You got to keep it concise and kind of keep it moving. And then I think something I did in the end as well is I just reconnected my findings a lot with the literature and the original literature as well. Kind of always going back a lot more than probably others would have with a more exploratory thesis. But I think that really helped from kind of the literature point of view. While we're on kind of this groundwork, something I've also done, which I would recommend, that wasn't really usual for thesis in my department, but I basically, after my table of contents, I had a page with definitions and a page with abbreviations. Because I was going through such a wide array of topics, it was really good to have like kind of the key concepts briefly summarized, so the reader could go back to the beginning. As like, okay, what was an online platform again, or what is data, or how is data-driven innovation informed? And kind of what I also did is I did the key citations, but I also did links to the relevant literature review chapter. So it's kind of easier to go back and forth, because that's eventually what happened that the readers would do. They didn't know the concept, so you gotta kind of guide them. And the other thing I want to share with you is, where did I get my data from and how did I find things? So with the key concepts for my literature, I really went off what we did in some of the key courses of my program, looked at the key literature I got there and saw, okay, this might be a publication from the 1980s or 1960s or 1990s. Other people have cited them. So kind of the forward linkages and said, is there something in that? And I remember I had one key publication that has been cited 10,000 times, but then you can search within these 10,000 publications, which really narrows down the search. Doesn't really speak for the quality of it, but at least it gives you a hand in that. So that was step number one. And then I just followed a lot of cross references in articles. So this author said that, there's a literature review of that, and then you just follow the link up. And in the end, what I saw, I had a clear branching, like a tree of literature. And then I just tried to bring them all together into a common root and see, okay, are there any authors that are quoted in the various streams of literature? Can I bring that together and that I used to guide kind of the summary of my literature review? So it was really exploratory in nature in that sense. Yeah, and then one last thing that I wanted to share with you is the data that I've used, because I also did something unusual there, which is it was times of COVID, so it was very difficult for me to collect proprietary data, to either interview people or to get survey results. So I used online publications. So I used interviews that were online. I used podcasts. I used videos on YouTube, and kind of prepared them up in a scientific manner using content analysis and various methods to kind of analyze that data, which was really helpful. It was a bit, well, my supervisor was very surprised and wasn't familiar with it because, again, I wrote my thesis in a department that was past looking, but I had the most contemporary data out there. I mean, things that I think the oldest source I had from online was 15 years old, but I think over 90% of the data that I had collected was published within the last 12 months at the point of research. So it really gave me access to really contemporary data for a very contemporary subject that is still evolving. But that way, I think I got actually a broader view than if I would have just collected my own data. And that was very good. And I think, would I have benefited from collecting proprietary data and going about that? Yes. But I think doing this online review, especially in times of COVID, but also when you have these contemporary topics, can really help you in triangulating your data and validating your findings. So that is definitely something I would, if you have the space, do. And talking about space, that's kind of the comment I want to close with is, I exceeded the word limit, and I purposefully exceeded the word limit. And I know there's different people in different departments with differing opinions. However, I strongly believe that if you need more words to reinforce your point, which you might need if you write about a topic that is a little bit foreign to your department or to your field of research, yeah, then it's definitely, it's words well spent. I mean, don't go overboard by 100%. I, in the end, exceeded my work on by 1,500 words, but I used them in my literature review, and they really helped me. They got me points in the end because it just added to clarity. So that is something I saw a lot of people stress about when I wrote my thesis. Everybody was very concerned. I'm personally of the opinion, don't be so concerned, because also at the end you collect points for content and you don't collect points for word count. How much is the deduction going to be? So there's a trade-off there that people can consider as well. But I hope that kind of frames my process a little bit. If you have any questions, super happy to take them afterwards. I thought in a Q&A style, this might probably be a bit better. But I think Tish has some points for us to share from her experience first.
Yes, I do. And actually, this is so nice because we're very, very different, you and I, in the sense that for people who maybe don't know what they're doing yet, because we're in January and you're thinking, oh my God, Philipp already started doing something in December, I'm here to tell you, don't worry, because I am the complete opposite. The way Philipp did his was completely different process to mine, and we both got A grades. So just to tell you, there's different ways to get good grades. And if you're not as organized as Philipp, you can still get a great grade. Okay, so with me, so when I was in your shoes this time last year, I knew three things. I knew I wanted to write about social robots, gender, and I had to make it sociology of law. Now, sociology of law is basically being critical of the law. What do people follow? Do they actually follow the law? What's going on? And I was like, well, there's no laws about social robots, so like I'm doomed. Or like, you know, there was so many things that I was like, there's nothing out there. And my supervisor had done stuff on drones, but he was just like, no, Tish, you just need to read and you need to like find something. And then I read and he was like, you're reading too much. You need to still find something. And so, because the normal process is to go through a literature review, right? But my terms weren't adding up, gender, social robots, and sociology of law. I was getting 0 hits here. So I really started to panic, and I was like, no, this is it. I know I validated this idea, but I can't do it. So then I took a step back and I looked at what roboticists were doing. Like, what are social robots? What are the developers up to? And I was very lucky that one professor of social robots accepted to have a call with me where she could run me through what she does as a social roboticist. So like, when she chills with a social robot and a social robot is there to interact with humans, what experiments are they doing? And what I was finding is that she was using this robot as a tutor for children, for storytelling. Another experiment was her using them for to like play chess with a child, which is like, it's really interesting because you're setting norms. So I was like, aha, now I'm starting to get a bit more of an idea. And then I found a conference specific for social roboticists. And I asked my supervisor if I could do an ethnography of this conference, since nobody, like, I never really see anyone say in their thesis. And I went to a conference and I like checked everyone out and observed what they were up to. But he was like, yeah, no one does that. Maybe it'll be a bit tough. You're doing it on gender, and the conference starts on the 8th of March, which is Independent Women's Day. So it felt like a good fit. So at this point, I go to this conference. I've interviewed some social roboticists, and all I know by this conference is like potential sociology of law theory, a lot of literature on like gender, technology, you know, so I have some ideas, but I'm still a little bit like, okay, like this conference is going to make it or break it for me. And it really made it, because all of a sudden, you know, we kind of see these like engineers as being like so far-fetched, but what they were doing is they're trying to understand society. You know, they were trying. So they were like, how does a sex robot look like in relationships? Like, would a partner get jealous, or how does that work? Or like, how can social robots, how can they challenge gender norms? So it was very much things that we look at as social scientists, but they use it as an engineering way that we don't necessarily as social scientists. So that meant I was like, aha, now I know exactly what to do. So for me, my methodology is really what enabled me to then go forth, to then have a literature review where I knew exactly what I needed to explain for people to understand what I wanted to show them. So then I did exactly the same as Philipp. It was like, how can I hold hands of the sociology of law people who will grade this, And it meant I had to go really basic. Like I had to just say artificial intelligence when social robots are a bit more and a bit less all at the same time. And it was really complicated. And I was just like, it was complicated to make it easy. And as soon as I go machine learning, they were like, no, scrap that. You're sitting on artificial intelligence. You don't explain everything that they should know, but you can't know with your word limit and everything. So I felt a bit bad because of my interviewees. I felt like I had to only use a certain content that they gave me. But all in all, it was really, really fruitful. So, and then the theory just kind of went in there. It all went into a puzzle. But you have to be very patient with it because, your core literature from your department will probably not help you via your thesis at first. So you just have to stick to it, and you can do it. And that's those are my words of wisdom. I think I can't think of anything more to say. Probably you'll have more questions than me trying to guess. So there we go.
I agree with you, Tish. Just to jump in there, I think bringing it down to the basics while covering all of the topics is really the most important takeaway. That is the way to go, because your audience, it's great that you're enthusiastic about the topic of AI or the topic you're writing about. And it's great that because of that enthusiasm, you have a lot of knowledge and you do want to share that knowledge. But it's the audience you're writing for doesn't have that enthusiasm and that doesn't have the same background knowledge. So you can easily overwhelm them with that. And I think that is something I personally struggled with. Like I edited so much detail out in the end. I remember that. That was the biggest chart. And I think, as you said, Tish, keeping it to the basics is super important.
Yeah. And I think in my conclusion, I literally wrote the 7 takeaways they needed to take. Like it was in bullet points, in like bold, like those are the 7 points. If you didn't get that, you'll get it now. Like, so I really agree with your review as well, because it's really, it's the way it is. And my examiner, I don't know, Philipp, your examiner, mine was specialized in like social work for children's rights or something like that. And refugees, I think it was something about, like, it was quite niche, but it had nothing to do with what I did.
Yeah, same for me. To be honest, I don't recall exactly what my examiner did or does, but it was nothing remotely connected to mine. My department covers very wide topics. Like I'm sitting in innovation economics, but we do country development, economic development, and all of that. I think he was more on that side. So not even part of my program.
Yeah. So that, I think that's something to remember when you're going to defend, is you will be the expert. And my examiner kept saying I was doing stuff on AI, and I partly was, but through social robots. So I was a bit like, I do more than that. But does anyone have any questions? You can obviously put it in the chat, or Rafsan, you've obviously done a thesis. Would you, does it sound very
Obviously.
different?
I was waiting for others, but I do have a question that, so while you guys were working on your thesis, and you guys were working on quite diverse topics and diverse areas, so I would assume that being from social sciences and sustainable development backgrounds, you didn't have a lot of knowledge in AI. So how did you overcome that lack of knowledge, both with yourself and with your supervisor?
Philipp, do you want to give it?
Yeah, I picked up the basic books on AI and did that. So I, as I said, I did a course of AI in society, but that was really looking at the implications of AI and how we deal with it. So first takeaway after that course is I did an online course by the University of Linköping about the basics of AI, like the basic coding structures and how things work, for me to understand it. And then to put things in perspective with my area of expertise in innovation economics, I looked, is there any books out there any compendia that kind of summarize the prior research. And I've worked my way through them, not through every chapter, of course, but the things that interested me and the things that I saw as relevant, and kind of made a structure from there on for myself. I think that was very important to just get an understanding of what's being talked about it.
Yeah, I think for me, I did my internship in like new technologies. So I kind of, and obviously I, founded Hub AI. So founding Hub AI was a big help, because I could be like, oh, we should invite this speaker. And they would be like, oh, sure, they'll do robots and AI. And I'm like, yeah, sure, let's do that, So I was, I definitely used a lot of resources that way. And exactly what Philipp said, you also want to see if your own department, not necessarily at Lund University, but generally like law, for example, or sociology of law, do any scholars speak about AI? Because surely they do, even if it's in really basic terms. But then you can see what level you go, because for writing a master's thesis, you are expected to find a gap. So that also helps you find the gap, because we're like, I'm just going to prolong the definition of AI here. And then, because I needed to interview developers of social robots, so it meant I had to use terms like and GPT-3, like the amazing, like I had Rafsan then to go like, hey Rafsan, what the fuck is a neural network? So that was really good for me. So shout out to Rafsan. I did give you a little pass in the acknowledgement.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. So anyone else? Yeah. Oh, okay. How much?
Okay.
Do you want to?
So we have questions from the online whiteboard. How much does the choice of topic influence who will be one's supervisor?
Okay.
Yeah, that's the first question.
So I don't know, but what Philipp's different. With us, we got to put the name down for our preferences. So we got our preferences, all of us. So Philipp?
Yeah, for me, it was completely opposite. I didn't have any say in that. I know that my department tried to match topic and supervisor if there was like a clear link, or somebody used the supervisor or then their later supervisor's prior research. For me, random, and I got somebody that was not linked to my area of research at all. So I got a complete stranger and complete outsider.
So how do I get the most of the sessions with my supervisor when their experience and knowledge of digital topics is limited? Philipp, do you want to start here?
Yeah. Well, they're not going to help you with digital topics. That is, I think, the mindset you got to have when you go into those meetings. I think where you can benefit a lot, or personally I did benefit a lot, is getting feedback on formal requirements, writing style, clarity, formatting, what is expected. And generally, does one understand what you're writing about? And is it written in an academic way? Because that is something I struggled with in the beginning, is I was trying to make things as understandable as possible, but that meant I wasn't then the most academic of languages that or lingo I was using. So that's something I worked on a lot with my supervisor. But I also found myself at a point, especially when writing the various chapters, that I just, to be honest, not that much input that I could have. So I asked my supervisor then to delay our meetings. So I had a lot of meetings with him in the beginning and then in the end for the review, because I had limited time assigned. So I asked him if he wouldn't mind just giving me more feedback in the end to kind of see if everything fits together as a picture as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so with mine, I would say, so in the Sociology of Law department, you get 4 sessions. So we had the introduction, which doesn't count with us as a first one, because of the environment. And I say my first one was like when we were meant to have delimited the topic. And that was that's probably the really hardest bit, because your supervisor doesn't know the topic well enough to help you like delimit it. That's how I found. Like I went in there hoping he'd have all the answers in the world for me, telling me, well, yeah, social robots, that's what you should be interested in for sociology of law. But he didn't know what a social robot was in the first place. You know, he didn't really know how they worked. So almost from the get-go, I'd be like, Philip, I was the expert between us. And that was almost annoying because you're not used to that. It feels so unnatural to know more than your supervisor when this is kind of the first time ever in my life where I had more knowledge than somebody else. So that was a bit strange for me. And I would say with me, it was more like ad hoc. It was like, if I felt like I didn't need supervision, that meant I just canceled the meeting, for example. And I think, or like a week before, like not just, but the rule was that he would always have to read text. We couldn't just meet just for like a one-off, like, yeah, let's see, like he'd want text to actually see what I was going to tell him. And that was really helpful because he'd find the text, he'd have the text in front of him. And then as soon as we'd meet, I'd have to tell it back to him. What did I send him? And that meant he'd be like, yeah, like you don't say that well enough. Like you need to tweak it because I didn't get that from that. Or actually what you're doing is like, you can't achieve that. Like this is a PhD, this isn't a master's thesis. So yeah, so I'd say that's a kind of, so I don't know how helpful that is, but I say Philip's point is really good for him because that suited him, whereas I needed more supervision in the middle. Yeah. Okay, so do you have any advice on digital data collection for someone who doesn't have much experience of these methods? Well, I think we can both say download otter.ai, and maybe Philip can finish that sentence because it's
I don't actually think you downloaded it. I think it's on, at least I used it online.
Oh, I used the app. Okay.
Okay, didn't know they had an app. And I know they definitely integrate with Zoom now as well.
Yeah.
It's transcription, what otter.ai does from video or audio sources.
Mm-hmm.
So I use it a lot because I analyze a lot of videos and a lot of podcasts that I said. But in order to quote them or to transcribe it, to analyze them, you need to have them transcribed, and nobody wants to do that sitting there word by word. There's technology out there that is for free. It is 2022. And we've used otter.ai, and I think that was really, really helpful. The other thing I wanted to share is in terms of digital data collection, because I got all of my data online, it doesn't differ much from doing general data collection like offline, I would say, traditionally through the books or the articles. So I've based it on the same principles that have been out there for case studies for years, and went through all of the big authors there for the general research methods that we got taught as well. The only thing that I did is I looked at specific literature as well in the beginning that guided on internet research methods, because there are a few considerations you need to have. For your sampling strategies, for example, the question is, do you do snowball sampling where one source leads to another? This would be the referred links, but there's some bias in there as well, because obviously the companies want you to click on things. Same like when Google shows you an ad, same way that CNN shows you the next link to the next article. So there's obviously considerations you need to have with that, or if you're using certain keywords. And I'm going to share as well in the chat, there was one book I found really, really helpful, which was by Houston, Vogel, and Lawrence, and it's called Internet Research Methods. And I looked at, I think, 2 chapters out of that were relevant for me. And it was a 15-page read. That's something, if you're invested, you can do. And the last takeaway I have with that is, because you're doing this online and it's new territory for a lot of departments, detail that in your methodology chapter. Show them what you did, and show them if you will need to assume bias at some point. Show them that you did so knowingly, and if there was anything you've done to reduce the bias, for example, or how that then, if you can't get rid of it, how that affects the validity and the results of your study as well. I think as long as you demonstrate that you've thought about it, it's definitely very good. And it's not necessarily reducing the quality of your academic work. Personally, I would say.
I completely agree. I'd say, so for data, it depends, because data is like information. So for me, I hear it in two senses. I see it in your literature review and in your methodologies. And so Lund University has access to, so either you connect through your VPN to Lund University or you're at Lund University. And I recommend to go to EBSCO or World of Science. And there basically you can like put like keywords. So like in like these ones, and like you can put and or or Google Scholar. Google Scholar isn't like seen as like academic. So with us, we have to say like for our literature review, we went on EBSCO with the following keywords, and we found 340 articles that were of relevance. But I'd say that that's quite nice to have a play around with. EBSCO is super intuitive. Like you just put one word and or, like you can click that. I would really recommend that, especially since you're in January, definitely try that out, just to kind of know what's out there. Because and it's normally, you normally have to pay for it, but Lund University pays for it. So definitely use that. Then for methodology, so if you're
Can I just interrupt there? I just wanted to say my department accepts Google Scholar and they like Google Links as well. So check with your department beforehand, because that also differs.
That does, because with us, for our literature review, for example, it had to be peer reviewed, whereas maybe that's not with us.
Google Scholar also shows you peer-reviewed articles, and Google Scholar also leads you back to EBSCO, for example, if Lund has a subscription, as long as you're logged into the VPN, if you're outside or if you're on site.
Yeah, I definitely recommend to be logged on. Then use Google Scholar. Just choose whichever one you fancy, but definitely have a play around. And then for methodology, so I did interviews and ethnographies, and I did an online ethnography by attending a conference. And that is just finding people who have done it and just copied, say, see, this is super academic what I did. But for the interviews, I needed obviously to get in there to have a gatekeeper. So that's making sure that who's pointing you to these people is reliable, and you can, and I used the professor of social robotics I told you. And basically I asked her specifically to get me into social robotic industries so I could interview basically the leading social robots developers, which was really cool. And I wouldn't have got in that way, and it meant that I could CC her in, and they immediately answered because of her status and because they work with her usually, so they knew her in any case. So I would definitely use that to my advantage. And then with the conference, I can't remember how much it cost, but I think it cost about 1,000 SEK to attend. And I think these types of things can get reimbursed. I was lucky enough that it did get reimbursed. And then it was a week-long conference from Monday until Friday. So everything went through Otter. Like I just recorded everything on my phone and it just went through. Sometimes I have to listen. And then it all got analyzed on a software called NVivo, which again, Lund University gives you access to. You just need to download it and learn how to use it. I'd say that's about the data.
Yeah, and if you say learn how to use it, YouTube has tutorials. There's been generations of researchers who've been doing the same thing, and it very quickly catches you up to speed. The same thing when I started working with Google Scholar before, and didn't really know about Boolean operators. So these are little ands and ors or nots. And stars for the wildcards, of course. Didn't know about that. That really helped me, and that really helps you in managing your search online as well.
Yeah. This in case you.
Yeah. There's another question in the chat. You already talked a little bit about it, but could you share about how you got access to the data you were researching?
So I think I've answered, mine were interviews through a professor, and then I attended a conference called the Human Robot Interaction. And that was for me to be able, because in the end, I basically checked what developers were doing to see what norms they were putting in, what laws they were following, if any. And there I could they were literally presenting to us how they did their research. So it made a lot of sense for me to go down that route. That's how I collected my data.
For me, it was a bit different. So I did a case study actually in the end about Apple. And yeah, it would have been great to interview somebody at Apple. And I was trying, I contacted Apple Sweden and I contacted the people in the US and I did my LinkedIn search, but you know, it's very hard to penetrate and they all have signed NDAs. So you're not going to hear anything behind the scenes. So I was a bit, okay, I kind of had this plan. I wanted to do that. What was I to do? And then I looked around other peer-reviewed publications, what strategies they had used. And I saw that quite a lot of them, especially if you're working with online platforms in the research, are using tertiary data. So either news articles or podcasts or these things that I've said before. So things that are freely available that do contain statements from people working for these companies that are hard to access. Of course, there will be a publication bias because it's been published and they speak about the context. So there's something one has to consider. But I thought this was actually a very good strategy to overcome the inaccessibility of the data that is sitting there, the knowledge that's sitting at these companies. The only difference there is that you obviously need a lot more because the more data you have, the more it evens out the bias, and you need to be aware of where you're getting the data from. Is it web sources? Is it news sources? Kind of what type of articles do they write? Is it informative or is it educational, driven at academia, or is it entertainment? Because there is different ways of writing and different ways of portraying points of views as well. Mm-hmm. But that is something that I learned about when I looked at the research methods at hand.
Mm-hmm.
So just adding on to what you just said, I was just going to ask, like, have you published your thesis or have you thought about publishing your thesis? And what kind of value does it add to your careers, especially with these digital topics?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to take that, Tish? You're still in the realm of research.
I'm very much in it. Well, so what I ended up, so my thesis ended up looking at depression, a major depressive disorder, gender, and social robots, because they're basically, whenever we think of gender, we think of women's issues. And I wanted to really challenge that. I was like, no, actually, when we're talking about gender issues in mental health, we're talking about men who like, there's a huge lack of data on men. So I think with that, I really wanted to pursue a little bit more this social robotics, mental health, and I was very lucky that I was asked to help on a research project which looked at perinatal depression, which is depression that occurs anytime from conception until 1 year after giving birth, and how robots could help screen with this. And it was with social roboticists. And so me having written my thesis about social robotics and about them, it meant that when I was in a room with them and we needed to design a robot, I knew their lingo, which was really funny because so I didn't need to adapt to them, but they needed to adapt to me. Like, what is gender? How do we conceptualize gender? How do we conceptualize norms? So that was really fun because I kind of knew, how they worked already. And it led to a really successful collaboration. We're now actually presenting at the conference that I did my ethnography on. So that was super successful. And now we're looking at funding a PhD for me to look more into this, more into social robots and issues of governance around them. So I'd like to say that my thesis is definitely a driving force behind what I do now.
I have a bit of a different point of view. because I was never that interested in research. So I am more motivated to work in the private sector. So I chose not to publish my thesis. I think at Lund University, if you want to do so, you also need support from your faculty at your department. And yeah, I think mine was too foreign for that. The other way you could go about it, of course, as well, as if you know other links to journals or to other professors more in the topic, because it really depends then as well what audience you're writing for and what journal you're writing for in the end, because you need to rework a little bit depending on the thesis, and that is work you need to put in. And that I can say because I've actually published my bachelor thesis. So reflecting on that, did it help me in my academic career? Yes, because it got me the master's, most definitely the entrance to that, and it got me connections academically afterwards that I was using then in my master's as well. So I think publishing really helps you as well if you're looking at a PhD, for example, if that's the route you want to take. However, if you want to go into private, I mean, it doesn't land you a job afterwards. However, that is something I think I want to share as well. You can still be proud of what you've done and use it to your advantage. So after I wrote my thesis, thought about, okay, I want to use that knowledge a little bit, and looked for jobs that were linked to that. So now I wrote it about data in online platforms. So now I'm actually a consultant for Salesforce, which is the world's biggest B2B platform, where if you do sales between different businesses, they store data and analyze that. And that job I definitely got because of the research that I've done, because I've had in one of my interviews a 1-hour conversation about my thesis and just demonstrated that I got knowledge. So if you're interested in the private sector, don't be shy. You've got knowledge. Use that to your advantage.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think we have one more question in the chat. Do you want to read it out, Rafsan?
Sure. So Laia says, do you think we must reach a unique conclusion at the end of the research about digital issues? Because as I read more and more, I find no gaps in my research area to address. Interesting.
So personally, I'd love to know what you're studying, Laia, if that's possible. But I think every conclusion will always say this needs more research, at least like in new digital technologies, is we just don't know, like we don't know enough still, because some of them are just still pretty new. So it's hard. And I think for me, it was more, I added to sociology of law. In a sense, it was like we really need to start integrating like STEM knowledge. We need students, critical students, to know more about artificial intelligence. And like just that, like it completely echoes it, like a whole chamber. But it's true, and that's okay. Okay, smart contracts. Okay, maybe there is quite a lot of research already done there, but I think it's okay. I think if your findings are in line, then you've done something right. You're just adding something else in your findings, even if it's little, or just saying that's what's happened.
Yeah, I agree. I think you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and I think the expectations might differ from department to department. But I think as long as you add to the discussion, the academic discussion, I think that's a good point. So my main takeaway, for example, was I didn't find anything groundbreaking or new, but one of my main conclusions was that I enhanced and partially contradicted claims that were, or theories that were made by another publication. When I did my thesis, I submitted it in mid-May, and that previous publication was done in April, was published in April. So of course that means some last minute work. However, that was one of my main contributions in the end, that I just said, okay, this one person said that, I actually found something else, and that's okay. Both can be right. It's digital issues. It's still evolving at the end of the day. And that is the glory of it as well. Yeah. It's contemporary.
Exactly. Yeah, I think, I don't know for law necessarily, but for me, I also base myself on theories. And I was like, yeah, like this one hadn't taken into account, like, because it was the mirroring effects. And I was like, yeah, there is a mirroring, but it's not the mirroring of society only, it's also the mirroring of the developers at hand. So I was like, you just need to expand it a tiny little bit more. And yeah, and I think, I mean, give or take, that's basically what I said. And that's something that is a contribution. But yeah, I wouldn't be too harsh on yourself. Like I think that's I think that's PhD level for you to really have like something to show. But I think master's level is just, how did you contribute? Yeah. But great. Does anyone have any other questions or thoughts or comments? Or where in the process you are now? I don't know. But no, otherwise we have any last nuggets to share, golden nuggets to. I would say don't work on weekends, give them off, just take that time out. Like, I think with the thesis, it is so easy to go into overdrive and like really stress out about it. And I was there, but definitely like give yourself a routine for this. I mean, Corona thesis is terrible. It's horrible. You're just in your room seeing the same four walls and you don't see your friends. It's just horrendous. So definitely like find something that makes you happy. If you haven't already found that, like if it's just going out for a walk, do it every single day and like just stick to it. Stick to a really like healthy mental health thing. Like you can be really like scattered all over the place during the day, but then like 5 o'clock or 3 o'clock some days, like just put your computer down, and then weekends just have them off completely, whatever that means for you. I think for me that really helped me.
Yeah, I think my two pieces of wisdom I want to share is, especially on these contemporary evolving fields of literature, something that you could do to think about that is always interesting is if you take a existing theory in the field of your master's and see if that is applicable, because the answer, you're never going to be able to do a generalized answer, but within the context of the data you collect, you may be able to say, okay, maybe there's something missing that is an extra layer, or one of the parts of that theory is not applicable. That I think is definitely something that enriches both areas of and digital and your area of expertise. And then the other thing I just really want to reinforce what Tish said: give yourself time. It is hard. Start early. I think that really helps. But also have a schedule. Stick to that schedule, and give yourself 2 weeks in the end to edit and not write anymore. Because particularly when you're writing a thesis for an audience that is not an expert in the topic you're writing about, you want to look over it with a fresh mind and say, okay, is this understandable? You want to be able to give it to a friend that doesn't understand anything about the topic and see if it makes sense. Because most likely the answer will be, you've written it as an expert, but you still need to edit it down. So give yourself the time for that. And look, if you don't, holidays, fantastic. Meet us in Malta and we'll take the sun.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm trying to think of an academic golden nugget. Yes, definitely. Like this is my big one, but I learned it in my bachelor's. I find I have like a short attention span a lot of times. And what I would say is when you read an article, just swear, just be like, this is fucking bullshit. Like just one sentence you highlight, even if it's just that one sentence, or like totally disagree, who the fuck wrote this, just whatever. Like no one should read your annotations. Just make sure to never send those PDFs over. And then when you've read that article, even though you're like, yeah, I'll remember that forever. No, you won't. You won't remember it forever, because why? So just like, even if it's a little post-it note, you know, like on PDF, just write a thing, just being like, yeah, really enjoyed this article because da, 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 da. And the chances are of you just copy and pasting that little summary in your literature review are pretty high, because you won't remember what you read from that article that was the bit that you needed. So definitely do that, and definitely annotate the way you want to, even if it's like, I reckon this person is a gem. Like, no one's going to read it. No one cares. Or like, I had fries for lunch. No one's going to read it. So, so that's definitely something I do to this day, and it just helps me stay focused. So that would be my academic nugget.
I should have done that, really. Would have made it a lot more fun. I just did a lot of colors when highlighting.
Oh, that's so fun.
I think the last point I want to say is, if you're interested, my paper is available on the Lund student papers. If you just search for my name, it should pop up. There's also, look at the reference list. If there is something that you find useful, there's all of the links there. Also, feel free to reach out to me, either via LinkedIn, probably is the best way, or in the other social medias that I'm on. I'm happy to help.
Yeah, totally echo that. If you, yeah, also, yeah, there we go. Great, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you both so much for. Oh, Melika has a question.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm here just to say that this hoodie suits me better than Rafsan. I'm kidding. We were talking.
You guys can
about
vote on that.
Where's mine?
Yeah, right.
I'm
Sorry.
kidding. So I'm not really in these digital topics, so I'm just literally using very last minutes to ask, because I'm just starting to write my master's thesis, and it already seems very difficult. And in terms of, you know, collaboration with your supervisors, and especially if you have two, like in my case. And this is not related to this topic in particular, but just I'm asking for your advice. Was it like, in your case, that you were the one arranging the meetings and, you know, stimulating communication, or that's something that supervisor does? Because I'm not sure where I am with them now.
I think it depends. I think with me personally, my supervisor would gladly ghost me. Like he would, yeah, he ghosted me for weeks on end. Like somehow that's acceptable for thesis writing for whatever reason. And it's most definitely you. No, actually with me, what we did at the get-go is we had to put a timeline together. And he would be like, all right, so by then you need to have this then, and I want to see that document, then this one, do that. So with us, it was a structured thing, but I think it was just for him to make sure that we did meet the deadlines, because we have like 4 deadlines before the final one, I think. So we'd meet like a week before those deadlines each time.
Mm-hmm. And was it some internal deadlines that you made, or something imposed from the department?
So the deadlines where you'd actually need to set, I know, I think it was only 3 submissions. Yeah. So before the final one, we had like 3 things to submit. It was like, I don't know, like an initial idea, then like your literature review and what potential methods you're going to have, and then like a pretty done draft, and then finally the end thing, because everything had to be peer reviewed by your peers, literally. Mm-hmm. And so what we did is that every time the week before, we try and meet with each other. Mm-hmm. So it was internal. It was like, yeah, formal, but also informal. But I think that's very different to Philipp.
Yeah, I mean, I took the approach a bit differently, because I believe it's your thesis, you should be in control. Mm-hmm. So I purposefully drove the communication with my supervisor. I think it's important to be respectful of their time and say, that's why I said as well in the beginning, I had meetings in the beginning and then asked if I could have more in the end, because, you know, they're also busy people. However, something that I also want to mention, and this didn't happen to me, but I know it happened to others, is at least in Lund University, the supervisors have time allotted to supervise you.
Yeah.
And if they ghost you, you are entitled to have their supervision. And if you have problems, push them or escalate it as well. Because it is, in the end of the day, it is important. And the other point that I would say, if you have more than one supervisor, think about how you want to use those relationships. Do you want to get the same feedback from both to kind of see if they say different things and then find a middle way, perhaps, or find the way that you agree with more? Or do you want to use them for different expertise and give them different chapters to read, for example, or give input on different subjects? But that really comes down to how you see that going.
I was just wondering on my side how to approach it, because it was very confusing. And it's a bit odd situation, because I am doing something in a project that's already existing. So, you know, it's challenging. Like, you are working on something that they already have idea on and want you to do it in a particular way, yet they are not really, you know, at least so far, I didn't feel like I got enough input. So I was just wondering, is it just me being passive, or so just that?
I'll let you in on, because I was in a huge predicament, because I actually got paid to write my thesis, but I got paid by a different department. I got paid by LTH, which has nothing to do with social sciences. And to say I got hate is maybe the biggest understatement, because people were like, how can you be critical? How are you independent? How are you, like I had to really prove that my thoughts were my thoughts, and it's not because I was working at LTH that I got these ideas. Far from it, you know. So all that to say that with us, at least in sociology of law, you have to show a huge amount of independence. So if like there's any like thing that would say, oh, Tish didn't come up with this idea on her own, then like your thesis gets taken away from you. So maybe, I don't know how psychology is, maybe it's similar, but yeah, with us, you really had to come up with your own idea, and you really had to be the active one, like throwing ideas there and have them backed up as well. Like, why do you want to do that? Why? Like, yeah, ask yourself the question 4 whys, and then maybe your supervisors will finally believe you. But yeah, I hope that helps. It's hell. It's not. It's somehow it's nice looking back on your master's thesis process, but I remember I didn't like it that much when I was in it.
Yeah, this is so very strange to me. I never did thesis. For my bachelor's, we weren't required to do it. So,
yeah.
You know, I don't want to seem unprofessional to someone. It's just, I'm not sure what to do.
I think, you know, it's an independent piece of research, so it comes always down to you driving it, because you are the author, you are in control. But if you're in a project, and this is something I'm saying not in the academic sense, but now, you know, I'm working with big projects with big clients. I jumped in midway. If the one person doesn't give you the information, maybe somebody else has the information, you know, if it's a team, and maybe you arrange a meeting with them, or you arrange the meeting through the person that doesn't give you the information, because you need the information at the end of the day and you want to get it. If you're doing it for academia, though, be reminded that maybe you need consent forms to use the information you're getting, unless it's already set up. And if you're writing in a project that already exists, but that isn't necessarily your thesis project, think about the audience you're writing your thesis for. Is the thesis going to be graded within that project or by the examination board? Because I know that there can be conflicts of interest, but you got to look out for yourself in the short and in the long term.
Absolutely. Yes.
Best of luck.
Yeah. Best of luck to you all.
Yeah.
You can do it.
Yes, we really did. We did it.
Yeah.
So we're proof. Great.
Any other last minute questions? Okay, then I would like to thank you both very, very much. It was a great talk and great discussion. Yeah, and feel free to reach out to us at HubAI, and hope you all have a very nice day, nice evening.
Yeah.
Take care.
See you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank